Oh
that you
yeah,
saw something. Yeah.
have you seen that? Did you hear about that?
I know I did hear about it. I don't know what it was, but I did hear that they heard about it,
Oh, I
which I think
see.
is
So
cool.
I heard on the news there was something up with the weather or
Oh
something.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The weather.
I hear not. I apparently I'm learning about this today actually. Airplanes serve food.
Wow.
No, they fly.
Hello and welcome to Spin It. This is
Welcome.
coming into our
Hello.
second episode today. We're going to be talking about uh, an album that you suggested, Samoski. Do you want to introduce it?
Yeah, hello. We're gonna review the Dead Kennedys' debut album, Fresh Fruit for Running Vegetables.
Okay. What made you choose this? Uh, yeah.
Is it one of my it's a really important, influential album, um, with punk music, um, and one I really like a lot. That shows kind of a lot of different aspects of stuff, um, with the sound of early punk music and um, kind of showcasing skills and um, just understanding of music. Like it's kind of got washed away. Like a lot of people are like, oh, early punk. Well, it's the music you play when you're bad at music, bad at playing instruments or stuff like that. And there's just uh, all over this album the guitar playing, bass playing, the drums, um, have all been really influential to me and countless other people. Um, and so I wanted to have all of us listen to it and talk
Yeah, I think it's
about it.
I guess where I want to start off is uh you talked about how influential the album is. Um I think it's really interesting how influential it was, yet how much it's wearing its influences on its sleeve at the same time.
Yeah,
So, like you can see clearly a lot of what it was inspired by, a lot of the different uh different elements that it's pulling from. Like I compared the vocals when I listened to it to kind of but like Sid Vicious at times. Um,
yeah,
and it's
Yeah.
that same kind of vocal delivery. You hear like some of the more surf rock influenced things. You think about I mean um the guitar on Kill the Poor, for example. I was just immediately like, oh, that's kind of like surf rock. I kind of get what they're going for. Like they're guys from California who've grown up on that.
yeah. Cause that's the thing that's really interesting with love the early West Coast punk and hardcore stuff. With how much it took from surf rock and uh stuff like that. Like all those bands from that time, like
Mm.
whether it be like um Descendants or Black Flag, like all these other bands over there, um, like had their start growing up listening to surf music and stuff like that, and then like finding out what distortion was, and then like having fun.
There's one of the things I noted from it was all those kind of surf musics are let's all go do blank, let's all go surfing, let's all go do this, and it's
Yeah.
that kind of call to action kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Like the one I always reference is actually the parody surf song from Top Secret, the one that's just um, everybody grab your surfboard and your 12 gauge too. We're going skeet surfing. Um, um, but like let's lynch a landlord, let's kill the poor, um let's go steal people's mail, you know?
I take
Yeah.
offense to that one. But yeah, a lot of the track, like the whole album is just taking like conventions and like subverting them, like
Yeah.
the surfer tropes and the kind of just general rock tropes, taking just all these different things and just filtering them through like a really heavy, like just ironic um style,
Just
right?
really
It's like every,
satirical. Yeah, like even just how it
Yeah.
opens. It's let's all go kill the poor, guys. Who cares about the poor?
Yeah.
it's that if there's one criticism that I have of the album, it's that it's so like it feels so heavy-handed at times, like
Mm,
now,
Yeah.
that it gets in the way of kind of enjoying the rest of it. If that's one thing that I have to say about it, that isn't
yeah.
like because uh maybe that's just because we all kind of got like we're all downstream of that era of like political, like polemic and
Yeah.
satire, where just very directly say like acting like the thing that you hate, right? It
Yeah.
was like the main deal, which it is really interesting because it's just like floor to ceiling, like that's like what they're doing. It's just like, yeah, we're gonna fucking kill the poor. We're you know, we love
I mean, that goes in both directions as well because they're gonna kill the poor, lynch landlords, and steal mail. Like
where do you
I
place
Maoism,
feel
these
like
guys? Yeah.
Maoism and
I do
killing the
feel like
poor is one thing, but you draw the line at mail fraud.
yeah.
So yeah,
I
I
do
guess
think
yeah they bounce back and forth between these ironic
Yeah.
statements and then just being, I guess, just hyperbolic
Mm.
and so excessive it uh showing what they what their where the beliefs are,
Mm.
um
Mhm.
but I guess in a way that does make them just a very honest band.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like there are definitely some times where it gets kind of muddled. It's like it starts with Killepore, which I think is very like it's pretty clear like satirization, like it because some of that like a lot of the early punk band, it's like ooh like just the like oh I'm edgy, I'm not oh I'm making fun of it, and like they just get kind of stuck in it.
Hmm.
But I do feel like Killepore does a good job of like um being clear with like what
Yeah,
it's
like
making fun of.
it's breaking down into immediately like, hey, look, aren't the areas cleaner? Don't you feel safer going outside now? Don't you feel great that you don't have to pay as much welfare tax now? There's no poor people. Like,
Yeah, it's like
it's
oh
It's like
yeah,
we
somebody with a conscience listening to that would get a little hot under the collar,
yeah,
kind of
yeah. Like,
reflecting on that.
yeah
it's kind of
exactly
it's satirizing it by like saying, hey, here's the things that make them want to kill the poor. These are the things that they think would be better if there were no poor people. So when you see in the public, and you can see consistently like, well, we've got to put anti-homeless things up. We've got to make sure that the rich aren't
Mhm.
paying as much tax. We've got to make sure, like they're putting all these legislations into effect. They are killing the poor. It may not be as like overt as using a fucking neutron bomb, but it is still doing the aiming for the same goals that the song is. And I feel like the satire is still, even though it's very on the nose, poignant because it takes it that step further rather than just going, they want to kill the poor. They talk about why they want to kill the poor.
Hmm.
yeah because and it touches on like oh like gonna kill the poor tonight, like I don't remember the exact quotes but like about like oh tonight we'll dance, it's like kind of like touching on like to the people they may not literally be like I want to murder poor people but like they're not like caring at all and everything they want to do is doing that.
I mean, it's really important to note what it's in the wake of as well. Like, This is
Mhm.
like the start of the 80s. It's after the 70s protests against the Vietnam War. It's like
Yeah.
all the poor people and the especially the people of color being like fed to that war machine. A bunch of people dying to it. It's a war that massively catastrophically affected the poor more than it ever did the rich. And
Yeah.
that's a theme consistently throughout the album is just how war has been utilized by the rich and how war has been utilized by those in power to either consolidate their power or get rid of those they deem undesirable. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's like it's got those like elements of classism talking about racism, like they one of the lines is like fan the fires of racist hate, and like that was like, yeah, it was pretty overt about what it was criticizing and about why it was criticizing it. But I think it's really
Mhm.
interesting that it was represented a lot by kind of this anger towards like the kind of aloofness of middle class. Like even right in the
Yeah.
first song, just like, oh, Jane Fonda told the liberals on TV that it's fine actually to kill the poor.
Yeah. That's one thing I've noticed, which I've always like thought was interesting with this album. It's very um it's very obvious that a lot of the jabs are at just conservative right wing stuff, but there's so much like stuff against like kind of middle of the road like liberal types.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of um lyrics about that throughout this album. Um it just really like kind of digging into that like um some like the obfuscation, maybe like some of that kind of like, oh well, oh well, I don't hate them, but like this works better, like just all
It's
that kind of
better
They
when
stuff.
they're
they
not
attack a
here.
lot of like the liberal kind of like trappings,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
milk toastism, fence sitting, um, lip service, right?
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
like one of like probably my favorite song in the album, "Holiday in Cambodia," right? Is just
Yeah.
about like a bunch of people. And to me, it always felt like it was kind of, yeah, I think it was kind of like directed at like you like young adults, like college students, and like these just like kind of wealthy people from the first world, just sort of
Mhm.
stroking themselves off about whatever, while all these atrocities are going on, and um they're just kind of like up their own ass about um all the horrors that are going on. um
Yeah.
it's like it's a holiday in Cambodia. It's tough kid, but it's like like it's sad is what it is. Just like the liberal apathy that kind of spreads
Yeah.
over the place.
Yeah.
That's it. It really feels like just like a massive invective at times to the kind of liberal apathy that springs up perennially.
Yeah.
Mm.
I feel like a lot of like there's a lot more angry punk albums that came later than this. A lot angrier, a lot
Yeah.
more emotive, a lot more like aggressive. But they did really well to make their anger so palatable in a way that
Yeah.
later people a lot of people wouldn't find Nirvana to be as palatable as this album is, or like some of the more aggressive bands that did come in the years after. Like its anger kind of pointed in a general direction upwards, and there's occasional pointed lines, but it's not all targeted in one direction. Like I don't necessarily know. Like thinking about something like maybe here's a bad example, but thinking about something like American Idiot, where it's so blatantly like, "Hey Bush, fuck you, Bush," and it's
Right.
so
Yeah.
targeted in that one direction. Like maybe at the time wouldn't have been at the time this was made wouldn't have been as palatable, but this just pointing generally upwards and going this sucks, that sucks, pointing in all directions is a lot easier to soak in if you are more middle of the road.
Yeah.
It's like
Because like it.
it's more the system is broken and we hate the system rather than we hate this person who runs the system and that person who runs the system.
Yeah. yeah, it's like because all that stuff is pretty like on the nose, but
Mm.
like it's still it's a I feel like it's a decent middle road because like some of the other um like big punk albums of the time, like some of the Black Flag stuff, which I really like. A lot of it's still like it's like I don't fit in, I don't care, like and
Mm.
it's just kind of like that type of stuff, which is like I love that still. It's like it definitely like not as poignant as like um a lot of the lyrics in this album.
In an era
Um,
where a lot of the more protest oriented music and music against the authority ended up co-opted by the authority, I'm thinking like things like Born in the USA. Like
yeah,
in an era of that, they made an album that definitely couldn't be co-opted.
Yeah.
Like
yeah,
they've
like
been so on
the
the nose to the point where they couldn't really be co-opted by anybody.
yeah, like the album cover of the album, just a bunch of cop cars on fire, was the um well, I forgot like the name of the riots, but it was um some of the riots in San Francisco in 1980 after the first gay mayor, I forgot his name, but he
Oh,
was
Harvey
murdered
Milk,
by
was it?
yeah, Harvey Milk. Yeah, he was murdered by Dan White and um he got off extremely easy. um and so there were just tons of protests around that time
Yeah.
and the album cover is just directly like that. And even the name of the album, Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables, um during or like after that murder happened, um Jello Biafra actually ran like for Congress in the area. Um, didn't win. Um, but one of his suggestions was to build a statue of Dan White and constantly have like baskets of eggs and tomatoes and different fruit to just throw at him.
A real Vermin
And
Supreme of his time,
yeah, so it was at a very charged time. So some of
Yo,
that,
California's first unisex toilet.
yo, let's go.
yeah. Yo.
um, so I feel like I definitely give it a little bit of a pass for some of the like real on the nose stuff because it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that stuff happens today still. It's like a big event happens, stuff's very like pointed against one specific thing.
Yeah,
Which
or at
then,
least like individual songs are pointed at very specific things and very specific parts of
yeah,
society, and I don't feel like that's as prevalent here. It is like Kill the Poor is
mm-hmm,
not about any specific
exactly,
group or any specific person. It's about like a wider society's views. You said the
yeah,
same thing about Holiday in Cambodia, Humphead. Like I agree with that. Yeah, like
mm-hmm,
whereas like I don't know, just another song like I wrote it in my notes, like Fortunate Son is like a song that's like very specifically about one thing and about one specific story, whereas it feels like
yeah,
this is a lot more generalized at like pointing at the atmosphere around the country and around their communities at the time.
yeah,
Mhm.
I think that
yeah. I
comes
do
out
think,
really interestingly. Yeah.
yeah, like it's done a, which some of that's kind of upsetting that it has aged like as well as it has.
Yeah.
Right, right,
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
like, oh shit, yeah, like
It's
that's
aged
still a
unfortunately
thing.
very well.
Yeah, and which, gives points to the album. But, you know, in the grand scheme of the world, not so much.
Hmm. What's your favorite song off the album, by the way?
Hmm, uh, that's hard. Um, because one of my favorites on this album is I Kill Children. I really like that song. Um, I still the lyrics of that song I'm like okay, like what are they? What is Jello cooking?
what
You
w-
know, I'm like,
what was Jello
like
cooking?
it's like I know this is sad. Like he does not want to kill children,
Yeah,
but I'm like,
what is
who
it
is he making
satire of?
fun of?
Who is? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's what I mean.
and
It's just very general. Yeah.
so I kind of interpret it as like um a lot of these tie up either just really famous like celebrity figures
Yeah.
or different political figures like um these kind of weird demons that they just have in their closet where it's like I mean do all the time you just learn like oh my my favorite the internet celebrity is actually a demon incarnate like there's these things that just happen and it's like
How much of it do you
so
think
I
was just
always
shock value though for the time?
yeah because that's the thing I'm like was this just shock value but then it's like
A lot. I mean,
I think it was a lot.
because Jello Biafra did say with like talking about like even just the name Dead Kennedys, he was like
Yeah. Yeah.
in an interview I read,
Yeah.
he was like, yeah, we were just trying to be just as provocative as possible. So yeah, Dead Kennedys, and it is like it makes sense, right? Like because the first wave of punk really like was the first like real full on like no protection exposure to just like all these new avenues of um
I did something stupid there, by the way. Sorry.
frustration.
I actually, after you mentioned I killed children, I pulled up the song and played a bit of it. Not remembering that my desktop audio is being captured. That's funny. Oh well.
Oh
And
well. But yeah,
you can edit it out.
the
Yeah,
yeah.
there'll be a Discord notification earlier in the podcast as well. Oops.
That's texture.
Yeah.
What was it?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, it's cool. It's the episode 2.
Yeah, we'll work
We'll
it
edit in post.
out.
Um,
Fuck it, we're
The
doing it
editor.
live.
Yeah.
um, but I think what I was saying, like yeah, like the first wave of punk was just like just like a full on like exposure like of just like just rage and frustration, especially coming from the youth in ways that you just never
Yeah.
seen before, like all like the ugly, dirty
Mhm.
sides of people, all the uncomfortable facts of life, the criticism of the status quo of the government just coming out in ways that you'd never hear on the radio ever, right? And
Yeah.
so them just being very provocative on top of all of that, just having like good just good music and salient critique, and also taking time to just be as like provocative as possible, trying to just get as much attention on them, right?
Yeah.
Doing all these antics
Mhm.
because it can seem like immature, right? Like because I think they had this whole thing where they we're a new wave band now as a joke, and they like painted like question marks on their shirt, and they were like larping for a bit, like pretending that they're some like yeah some new wave band, but um it was all just like a big effort. Like they were having fun, but they were also just trying to um keep the community, keep the movement in the spotlight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can respect that a lot. Even if I do find it like ham-fisted now, it's like things were a lot different in the 80s. Is basically what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Even before,
Mhm.
because this is like because Reagan was 80, right? That was like when he first started. Like this is
Yeah.
just at the start of Reagan's, fucking reign of terror across the United States too. So it's interesting. It's interesting seeing like a very political punk album that didn't have the influence of Reagan strewed across
Yeah.
it so far.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
that's one thing I think is funny. They actually on a later Dead Kennedys album. I'm blanking on was it plat? It may have been yeah, and plastic surgery disasters. They re-recorded um California Uber Alice. Um and they did like a jazz take on it of it. And
I'll have to
um
hear that. I've never heard that before.
yeah, it's called We've Got a Bigger Problem Now, and it's about Reagan. Um so I remember
That's
hearing
great.
Joe Biafra talk about that. Like, yeah, like we released this song, really liked it, and then Reagan got in, we were like, oh fuck, like, um, like this song doesn't feel as poignant now, as that this demon is here. Like,
Yeah.
um,
Oh,
and
the way sorry.
yeah,
I think I've got a
um,
pretty unique perspective on this because like being from the UK, growing up in the UK, like
mhm,
music had a very different come up here into punk music because the radio in the UK was entirely privatized. There was BBC Radio 1, BBC Radio 2, BBC Radio 3, and BBC Radio 4, and there were no other radio stations. Those are the only radio stations there were, and you weren't allowed to have your own radio stations besides that. Like BBC owned the licenses, well, the British government owned the licenses and they only gave them to the BBC. So it led to like
mhm.
the BBC, the God-fearing BBC, that at the end of every day would play the national anthem with a British like Union Jack on screen as the end of day messages appear. Like that BBC got to decide what was on the radio and what wasn't.
Oh my god,
So when you got the Sex Pistols coming along, making like anti-Queen songs, like
mhm,
um that wasn't allowed on the radio. It was straight banned. You couldn't play it on the radio at all. So you ended up having these pirate radio stations. One of the most notable ones being Radio Caroline, which is basically run from a boat offshore with some generators on it.
Oh, that's great.
Um,
that's sick.
was broadcasting this kind of music, this kind of punk music, and that's how that ended up being spread more because it was either live events or Radio Caroline, which was hosted by I believe Terry Wogan at the time, who went on to be a BBC host later. Um,
Mm.
and like the BBC hated this, the British government hated this, and they wanted to shut it down to the point where they were given the right to, even though the boat was in international waters, they sent a group of bailiffs in with fire axes to destroy their equipment on the boat.
Oh my god.
Um, and one of the people who did that was actually a co-worker of my sister's dad. So I managed to
Oh.
have a conversation with him about that, which was really interesting. But like, that's how music was in the UK. So you couldn't make that shock value stuff and expect it to get anywhere at all because the only
Yeah.
radio there was, like, there wasn't even any options for radio that would play anything more oriented towards like punk. Like there were some Beatles songs that were seen as too risque. Like
Wow.
that's where we were at the time. So the Sex Pistols came along and things started to change. And then this is only like, I think 3-4 years after Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like it's
Yep.
Yeah, 'cause that was,
in the
what,
UK it would have
77?
been so much more backwards than this. And especially considering their reputation went countrywide as quickly as it did. That kind of spread wouldn't have been expected in the UK.
Yeah. Because I think that's why some of like, because um, this is always a thing people get talking about. It's like, oh, where did punk start? Oh, did it start in the UK or in America? And it's just like, um, it's a thing that doesn't, really matter.
Yeah. Like
that
punk as a
much.
sound started like in various different places that people co-opted, but punk as
Yeah,
an
like,
attitude was there long before. Like
yeah,
you can see its
and like,
roots in jazz, you can see its roots in like
exactly.
all kinds of different music genres of the 50s,
Yeah.
40s.
All this stuff like MC5 and the Stooges
Yeah.
coming out of Detroit. It's um like some of that, like in some of the Midwest areas, like some stuff was real early, like out there, and it's like it just didn't have that like insane kind of instant like blow up that like Sex Pistols did.
Mm.
Right.
Because it is interesting. It's like there's a lot of, you know,
I mean,
kind of
we do have to
industry
mention there.
planty things.
Yeah, we do have to
Yeah.
mention there that the Sex Pistols was kind of, hey, this thing could be marketable. How about you guys do this? How we could
Yeah,
maybe
Yeah,
market
like-
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they were just kind of put together,
Mm.
and
So
that's
yeah, I think
where
they
some
went
of
to
that-
I think they went to Sid Vicious and were literally like, "Hey, we got this band. Do you want to be in it?" Like,
Yeah,
and it's not any
and-
member of the band. It was like their manager.
yeah, and I think they're kind of one of the big ones that people heard about them and just ran with it and are like, oh yeah, punk music, bad at playing instruments, because like they weren't really like they didn't start a band and get together naturally. It was like a kind of
Yeah.
set up thing. So like,
Mhm.
like yeah, they aren't that great, but it's like, that's what I think's really interesting. The Dead Kennedys is I know for sure the bass player Klaus Fluoride.
God,
Um,
the names are all wonderful. Like
Yeah,
I know it's
crazy.
like we're talking about like Johnny Rotten like and Sid Vicious before that, which are also both wonderful names, but like Jello Biafra, like
yeah, and
Who was
Um,
the other guy? It
now-
was just like Ken or something, or
Ted.
Ted,
drummer's
and his
yeah.
name's not
first
even
name.
Ted.
Yeah, like that's sick. I love that.
Yeah,
But Klaus, he like started like doing like jazz, like that's like how he learned
Mm.
to like play and do stuff, and you can hear all over this album. There's just great bass lines.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the opening to California Uber Alice. I mean, that's
Oh, it's iconic. Yeah.
got to be the most iconic punk bass like line of that I can think of. I mean, it's like growing up like with skateboarding games and stuff. Like I know
Yeah, yeah.
Sin, you have that too. It's like this. I swear like every Tony Hawk game had this song in it. Like
It's so like
It's
I think
just-
it was literally the opening to what was it, American Wasteland?
yeah, it was. I don't even remember, like 7 years old, like booting that game out and being like, oh shit.
Yeah.
And like,
But like this and
It's
the
just
Ramones were like
great.
still used frequently into the 2000s to represent punk.
yeah,
Like
Um,
especially early 2000s when people were talking about punk, this is the kind of thing they were referencing.
yeah,
And it's interesting how much of a like because there was a lot of punk music in the 90s, but yet still like people when they were talking about iconic punk music were looking back at like 1980,
yeah.
1970s. Like yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it definitely in the '90s, I mean, there's still a lot of great punk in the '90s, but it
Mm.
did get a bit saturated by
Yeah.
then. Like
I-
there were so many.
I think it diversified too a lot.
Mhm.
Like because the punk like kind of banner was kind of easily carried from like the first ways, Sex Pistols, your Ramones,
Yeah.
and moving into like the early hardcore stuff, your Black
Mhm.
Flags,
Mhm.
your Flesh Eaters and your Dead Kennedys. It was you could like really tell these guys are punk, whatever. But then it kind
Mhm.
of just exploded, right? Like just the
Mm.
influence and
Yep.
everything kind of like spread around, which I think is really cool. But it made it a lot more like it made this sort of direct, like easily recognizable trappings of like what
Yeah.
made something punk kind of
Am I missing a
subdued
shared
it.
ancestor between like Johnny Rotten's vocal style and Jello Biafra? Like because they
Um,
sound pretty similar to me, and am I just missing some shared ancestor there that they're both inspired by, or is it like pretty direct? Like, oh yeah, I heard Johnny Rotten, and now I want to sound like
Miles Davis.
that.
Um,
Frank Sinatra.
Charlie Chaplin. Um,
The shared ancestor, the first single-celled organism.
the amoeba acids and the primordial sludge of the Cambrian era. Um,
but yeah, but that's like a good point you brought up because there's all that kind of the big like punk explosion, and then you have it gets a bit lost. Like you have some of the late '70s stuff, um like Wire coming out with Pink Flag in '77. It's like people are like, oh yeah, oh it's like post punk album, but it's like okay, it's like hold up, like that. That's like 3 years before like a lot of the punk's like big explosion stuff.
Yeah,
So it's
it
like
seemed like it all picked up really quick. Yeah,
yeah,
'cause
and
like I said, like
you end up
you never mind the bollocks is like literally 3 years before this, and it's seen as like a really foundational punk album.
yeah,
yeah, um,
yeah. The whole punk kind of scene had, yeah. I guess that's fitting. Yeah, it had like a Cambrian explosion, and then you have the overpopulation crisis
Yeah,
leading to leading to very few surviving lineages, um, which
yeah.
then
all right, let's
are
keep
able
this
to
analogy going.
populate.
Yeah, let's see how far
Yeah.
this can go.
And so then once you get to the 90s, you have a lot of smaller, less successful ventures
Yeah.
into your indie masturbatory circles.
You
And then
got
you
the
have
first lizard that walked out of the ocean and became mainstream punk music.
you
Yeah.
have
You got to look at like
Yeah.
the things like the Pixies.
disgusting
Yeah.
creature like
Yeah.
that was Green Day that crawled out of the booze pits.
Oh, I was going
You
back
have-
earlier, but you're right. Yeah.
you have the weird, I guess, possible crossbreeding of the metal and punk scenes, which created the hardcore Liger that is not able to reproduce itself, but can be produced.
Okay, what kind of inbreeding created math rock then?
I think, I'll say
Yeah, that one's kind of hard.
I'm gonna say that it was.
It's like a royal
gonna
house
say-
on an island that kept itself going
Okay.
internally.
I'm gonna say it was Moody. I'm gonna say it was a combination of like The Cure and Kraftwerk and I don't know, something else. It has 3 parents, and that's
Oh god.
Oh my god.
why all it can do is tip tap because it lost its finger bones.
Look, they took the embryo of Blur and then they took it out of Blur and then they put it into gorillas by while
They
inseminating.
artificially inseminated gorillas.
Oh, god.
Yo,
Are we still talking about musicians here?
Yeah, what
it's just
even
like that
happened?
tweet that tweet I saw the other day. Gorillas perform oral sex at Bronx Zoo, and it's just like, oh great! I hope they perform Feel Good Inc. next.
Oh, that was a great tweet.
This album is very good.
Yeah,
I think.
It
Yeah.
is. That is true.
I
And
yeah, I do really like a lot of the messaging on the album very consistently. Like it's really clear what it's trying to say, what it who it wants to criticize, and as a general idea. And like I do love how it delivers that. The sound is great. I love where it led music afterwards, and like California Ubralis is wonderful song.
yeah.
Yeah, I had a wonderful time listening to this album, and I think we should go and steal people's mail now.
I agree with this
I would ask you
100%.
to exercise a little bit of caution.
We're gonna take a
Just
baseball
like
bat and we're gonna knock
I,
over all of the. We're gonna knock over all
So
of the mailboxes.
if you see a United States Postal Service van, you can just steal from it.
Yeah. Look, if you see a USPS worker who comes to your door and says, "This package is for you," you can just take it, and then
Yeah,
just you go. Then you run out front of next door and you take their package, and then you run out front of the next door and you take their package until you have your entire area's mail and you can ransom
yeah, exactly.
be sure to conceal your face. A lot of people have Ring doorbell cameras now.
it. That's what you only let it see the back of your head. You gotta lock eyes with the
Yeah.
mailman the entire time you do this.
It'd probably be more intimidating if you managed to like, if you do like the reverse hoodie thing, where it looks like
Oh, there you go.
you're approaching from the front, but you have a mask on the back of your head, so you look like some sort of skinwalker creature with fucked up joints as you come up and steal their package. I think that would make them too afraid to contact the police.
Okay, and one
Uh,
thing I do feel like we need to bring up about this album is some random like interspersed like almost like Funland like clown like type of vibes that are randomly in this album,
I thought you were gonna bring up
which I
the
find very
time that they
interesting.
randomly say the N word.
That
I
is
was
the
gonna
other
bring that
thing.
up at some. I
Yeah,
did
yeah.
want to address that.
Yeah,
Like,
I
yeah,
kind of want to
the
keep a playlist. I want to start making a playlist of all of like the songs that I listen to that have a white person saying the N word in it.
yeah, like because that was the thing with like how we were talking about with like being abrasive and like, oh yeah, we'll show them.
Hmm.
That just didn't like that's not good. Don't do
I
that.
don't know if that hit
Actually,
differently in 1980, but I look at it now and be like, what's the point? Like, who are you offending by saying this other than people who have enough to deal with?
yeah, it's like
Why are you
because the
punching
line, it's
down?
like
Yeah.
he's obviously trying to like invoke like, oh, like you're saying you care about these people,
Mm.
but like you don't really. You just want to say that to like look good.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
while also saying the racial slur, so it's like okay,
Mm.
like that doesn't.
Like the only way I
What?
could imagine
You
somebody
can't do
doing it
that.
is if they're trying to quote someone else. Like they're literally saying it in someone else's voice. Like say I don't know, there is a big politician that just said a racial slur in like some leaked audio or something, and then they quote that kind of attitude and that kind of rhetoric is like in 1980 I'd be able to get that, but it didn't feel like that. Even if it's not their voice, it's still like a
Mm-hmm.
character that they made to play and
Yeah.
say it. Yeah. It's like, you could have
'Cause
just
it's-
not done that.
yeah, like that makes the whole point kind of null and muddy. But yeah, I'll throw this out. Like, let's see, I think "Drug Me" may be the first song where you hear it in the chorus. There's just like an organ that just comes out of nowhere, and it's like it's kind of like, oh, huh, like that's kind of weird.
Yo, Funland at the beach.
Yeah, exactly. It then goes to got Chemical Warfare with just like there's goofy breakdowns in it.
Like it is.
What's
At the
the
end.
yeah? Is that the
It's
one
a
where it's
very
like
California.
yeah da 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 da?
Yeah, like
yeah,
you are on a carousel,
yeah.
and it's like this is kind of funny that that's just a theme throughout this album is going to that.
It's an incredibly Californian album.
Oh, very like it's the most Californian.
It feels like like there's no other place in the world this could have come from.
Yeah, exactly. That's like what I think. Which there's a lot of music where it's the case, like with um a lot of like at least in the '90s, like hip hop music, you really could like, oh, like here's West Coast and like East Coast, like stuff just
Yeah.
just by hearing what they did, you can kind of tell. And it's like punk was a lot like that too. It's like you hear this, it's like, oh, that's West Coast, and then you hear like um some of the stuff from like New York, like Ramones. You're like, but Ramones do get a bit. They do feel New York to me, but like they still do the beach thing.
Yeah.
Um, but everything that's interesting with this album, how it's so clearly like, yeah, this is West Coast punk.
I mean, like, when I wanted to listen to some of the surrounding stuff, so I went back and listened to 70s sort of more protest oriented music before this, and I listened again to like The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, and like
Yeah.
it kind of just really did bring attention to the idea for me, and bring to the forefront that like the stuff that changes culture, the stuff that is going to actually have big effects positively for culture, is not going to be immediately glamorous. It's not going to be something that is palatable to the masses. It's going to be something that
Hmm.
is fought for, and something that is like rubbing up against authority consistently. And punk music is definitely something that you kind of feel those roots in very consistently. Of like, I mean, I kind of felt like a lot of their tendencies like play as fast as you can, get the show over before the cops show up, kind of stuff. It's like, we don't
Yeah.
want you saying this. You don't have a license to be here. Like, get the fuck out. And
Yeah.
it's just punk music is consistently, yeah, rubbing up against the grain, and it kind of put that perspective on what we were listening. And I'm glad I did that, like, outside reading, I guess.
Yeah.
It did just put some of the stuff in perspective.
I guess the thing that we can kind of consider as we're kind of bringing things down is like how this kind of transforms things in today's age when punk itself has kind of been co-opted, you know,
Hmm.
like
Pop
how
punk,
it's been
yeah.
I mean, even just punk, like just the punk aesthetic, punk icons, even like
mm,
bands that were really
yeah, you get
cutting edge
like,
and really abrasive. You see people wearing Black Flag shirts, you see people sporting all kinds of attire that was really countercultural back in its
mm,
day, and the messaging and just the ethos of punk has sort of been kind of folded into really easy marketable stuff, and
yeah. It's like I talked
Hmm.
just
about
the
Johnny
consumption
Rotten.
of punk.
As I talked about Johnny Rotten earlier. He's like gone full right wing, and is like
Yep.
going to turfs and saying, "You know what's punk? Being a turf. Turfs are the most punk people I know." And it's like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, everybody
Yeah.
everybody wants to be punk.
Yeah.
It's like that with a lot of things where it's like everybody wants to think that they're something that it's like that with a lot of things. Like everybody, like a lot of people who are just avowedly not feminist, want to claim that they're like the real feminists, because being the real whatever is like, something that they can kind of hold themselves, up with,
Yeah.
so being a real punk, right? Because it's always and the whole kind of social aspect of like punk, because if you're somebody who is particularly concerned about maintaining your standing in whatever kind of circle, being the real XYZ,
Mm.
delineating that, being able to go, oh, I'm a real punk, I'm a real feminist, I'm a real this or that, it's
You're a
very
gold
affirming to
star
yourself.
lesbian. You've never even looked at a guy.
Yeah, being able to do that is very affirming. So people want to be able to do that stuff. So
Mm.
it is concerning, I guess, just with like, because one thing that I was kind of listening about that, one thing that I was considering rather as I was, listening to the album is like, kind of comparing it like then to now, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a crazy new lens of analysis or anything,
Mm.
but just like, you know, um, how is the kind of current punk, landscape evolving? Like how much of it is um real, authentic stuff, how much, like where the chip's kind of lying, how easily are people kind of drawn into, you know, I don't know, just like marketing traps and just the aesthetics, a lot of stuff
Mhm.
like that. That
Yeah.
and I know there's a kind of like, um, it's kind of a trap in itself to just look back at earlier punk movements and think that everything was so like clean cut, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, that it's like, oh, like everything came together so well, like they were like, how were they able to make these albums, so provocative, like it's so bold, and it seems so easy. It's because we're all looking back, I don't know, I'm kind of rambling at this point, but I was thinking about a lot of stuff and just like contextualizing it in the past versus today.
Yeah.
But I still do think there's a lot of value in kind of revisiting earlier eras of, rebellion and punk culture. So I still love this
Mhm.
album a lot myself.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed it as well. And I think we're kind of coming to a close here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'd never listened to the album through, and I kind of inadvertently was like, oh, I heard so many of these songs growing up, and I never even realized. It's just one of those
Yeah.
things I probably should have listened to a long time ago, and I'm glad I finally did.
Yeah, I couldn't recommend it enough. It was like um when I started buying like records, it was one of the first ones that I was like super excited to get. And
Mm.
it's just it great. It's a classic. I definitely recommend giving it a listen.
Yeah. So next time around, we are going to be reviewing
The Dark Souls soundtrack.
Dark Souls OST. Um,
Let's go.
we're going to be talking about Hellfire by Black Midi, and I'm
Oh
looking
yeah,
forward to that one next week.
me
But
too.
thank you for listening. If you want to be a real gold star lesbian, you got to like, comment, and subscribe. That's the only way.
Oh,
That
and
that's
the
that's
notification bell.
Yeah. If you
You
want
know
to
that.
exactly, yeah. If you want the hollow and foil gold badge of approval, that's how you get it.
If you want, you can go out and kill your landlord as well.
Yeah,
If you
you
want
can
to
lynch your
True.
landlord and steal
You can
mail
just do that.
specifically from Humphead's truck.
Yes.
I'm gonna stay strapped.
And with that, thank you for listening. Goodbye.